We're back at the Power Shift Summit at the Newseum. We have been talking about what newsrooms are doing right now to deal with the erupting stories and taking care of their people. We've talked with reporters who broke the stories and courageous women who told those stories for the first time. And now, over and over again, we've heard we need to make systemic change. Not just listen today, but change things that have enabled silence and have enabled the bad behavior. So, and we should say intolerable behavior. So our conversation leaders to start out with, and a room full of people who are ready to talk as well, are going to get us going on this. Joanne Lipman, you have just stepped away from USA Today in the editor-in-chief role, and you are about to release on January 30th a book that we'd like to be sort of the manual to help us build power for women. And the title is?
That's what she said. And the subtitle is What Men Need to Know and Women Need to Tell Them About Working Together.
So if I were to ask you systemically, what has to change?
Well, number one, and the reason I wrote the book, is because we need to bring men into this conversation. The fact that, and I'm thrilled to see some men in the audience today, and there are good guys, but there are a lot more of the good guys out there. And the reason I wrote the book is because women do talk amongst ourselves a lot about the issues that we have surfaced today and many other issues. And that's great, but that's 50% of a conversation, and at most solves 50% of a problem. So we need the men to be joining with us. And so I wrote the book. It came out of an article I'd written. The headline was Women at Work, A Guide for Men. Because by not including the men in this conversation, there's two unfortunate side effects. And one is that we very unintentionally demonize perfectly good men, the good guys. And then secondly, because we're not sharing these concerns and issues that we face every day, these guys are clueless. They're just not aware of what the issues are. Catalyst actually did a survey and found more than half of men are not aware of the issues that women face. And so we've got to, in order to move forward, to do that. And the one other point I would make is that what the book gets into is precisely about that. It's about the solutions. And it's because while this harassment issue is incredibly important, we've got to solve it. But to solve it, we've got to solve the rest of the culture. And while not every single woman has been sexually harassed or actually sexually assaulted at work, every single woman, every woman in this room, every woman who is watching, every woman knows what it feels like to be overlooked, underestimated, interrupted, and marginalized. And that's what we have to fix to go forward.
And when you talk about changing cultures, when I'm working in newsrooms, I like to use Edgar Schein's model in which he says that, yeah, there's some things above the surface, like an iceberg, you know, like the slogans we put on the wall and the way we decorate. And we think if we change our mission statement, maybe that'll work. But underneath the water of that iceberg are assumptions so deep we don't even talk about them anymore. So you can redecorate and have a new mission statement and hire a few new people. But if the same assumptions exist, if you haven't surfaced them and challenged them, you are not going to change your culture. So let's talk about changing cultures. Let's go to Lauren Williams from Vox.
So it's interesting. Vox hasn't been around for a ton of time. It's about 3.5 years old. Vox Media is a little bit older, but it has grown a ton. The company has grown a lot in the past 3.5 years. And I think something that we, the company at large, and us at Vox are grappling with is going from this like scrappy startup and like we don't have an HR department and you know there aren't any rules, we're making them up as we go, to you know being this really established media company, and what that means and what sorts of rules and guidance need to be put into place to create an environment that's not just, you know, a well-meaning environment for your employees, but really actively, proactively protecting them. And I think our company is doing a lot of that, but it's a work in progress.
Can I ask you, even for a few specifics, you know, a startup culture can often be very relaxed, very much representing the personalities of the people who put it together, and sometimes including in that is like a 24/7 mindset because we were the original founders and what was our lives. And suddenly you're bringing on people who aren't going to make as much money as they will if it works, but much is expected of them, and sometimes behavior, not just work ethic, but behavior that models what those top leaders are doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just so on point. We're so in that mode right now of trying to dial back on the workaholicness of it. I think that in the 3.5 years that Vox has been around, we went from having no parents on staff to having, I don't even know, I've lost count. And I've had a baby, a bunch of my coworkers have had children, and that, you model behavior, and it's very helpful for someone who is empowered to model that behavior and model that change. It is very hard for it to come from the bottom up. And that is just an incredibly, even if you don't have a kid, seeing that people around you have them, and seeing how many hours people are working, and analyzing if that's really necessary. All of those things are part of this shift, of this growing up and maturing.
And Carrie Budoff Brown, you as well. There were women who felt that they had to check their personal life at the door to come to work, and not just at Politico, but certainly at many organizations. And then Carrie takes over and brings with her people like Sudeep Reddy and Tracy Schweikert, who we heard from this morning. What are you doing differently?
Well, Lauren, what you said is very familiar to me. I've been with Politico since it launched, from that early stage where we worked all the time, and that was the expectation, to going through, I think at the 3.5-year mark was a point where we really had to confront, I wasn't in management, I was just a reporter at that time, but confront exactly what you're talking about. You cannot expect people to live in startup mode forever. You cannot expect them to sacrifice everything that they have forever for a job, and that we need to put structures in place that support them. But it's really been now we're going to be 11 years in a week or two. It is a process. I had a baby about 5 years into it, and I was the first one to have a child at Politico, but that was a moment where I personally felt like Politico was starting to grow up and understand what it takes to support someone who's pregnant and has a child. And they gave me 5 months off, no questions asked, all paid. And then right after that, established a policy.
The question was, to hear the question, are you hiring?
To that point, last year we formalized paid family leave, paid leave, parental leave. And there are multiple men in my newsroom, and I encourage these men to take 3 months off. I think I have 2 or 3 men out right now, and I say to them, we will make do without you. No one, I love you, you're great, I will miss you, but you need to take this time. There are not many places where you're going to get 3 months off to go spend with your young child. You have to do it. And I have a rolling calendar of men who are going to be taking this benefit. And I think that's, and women in my newsroom, if I know that they're pregnant, Tracy, the VP of HR, is back there. I basically say, what you want, I will get you, even if it goes beyond the 3 months. That is the flexibility that Politico gave me when I had a child is probably the single biggest reason why I'm still at Politico. Creating that sense of loyalty has been so important to me. In terms of just culture change, though, to complete the cycle that Politico has gone through to a place, I basically have a barometer that when I go out to try to recruit people, I want to get to a point where I don't spend the first half an hour explaining why Politico is not a bad place to work, why it's a great place to work, and why you can have a life and you can work hard. And that has been one of the biggest things that I've tried to focus on in the past year. And it's basically almost entirely from my own experience. What I experienced, how I nearly left Politico early on because I didn't know if I could survive there, to surviving, to getting to the point where people can be who they are and be at a thriving publication and feel supported. And it's so crucially important to me. And I pride myself on maintaining that standard, creating a team that models, like Lauren said, good behavior, that insists day in and day out. I had a staff meeting yesterday and said, I do not, I say this almost all the time, I look really dimly upon people who are not good to each other. And if you're not, that is a real black mark in my book. So if I model and I say that, I think we can weed out the bad elements of the newsroom. And I luckily have the benefit of half of our senior leadership on the company is 50% women, and the leadership of my newsroom is 50% women. And they're in decision-making positions, assigning stories, editing stories, and I think that's extraordinarily important.
Well, can I underscore the fact that you talk about talking to people about this? Because what we know in leadership is that you can say you have an open door policy, but there are many people who would still never dream of walking through that door unless they had some big issue. So it isn't enough to have it open. It isn't enough to have benefits if the assumption is if I take them, there will be a negative consequence. And so the fact that the leader of the organization not only makes certain that those things exist, but then goes to people and says, look me in the eye. I am not kidding, because all it takes is one story about somebody who got a bad job evaluation or didn't get a promotion after they took that leave, and then that story becomes your master narrative. So you're consistent, and it's not enough to say, well, I told this to people once, or I say it in the annual meeting that I have. It has to be embedded in the conversations that you bring to the table every day.
And I think there's almost an expectation in our newsroom that if you're having a baby, no matter if you're man or woman, you're taking at least 3 months off. You're not having any question about vacation, anything, you're getting paid and you're going. And so we might get to the reverse where men feel guilty for not doing it, but we'll see.
So we've talked about the culture in organizations, and importantly, we recognize that harassment is not divorced from discrimination. And the lack of diversity in our newsrooms, it's all interconnected. Alfredo Carbajal, here you are, we've invited a guy. You know, and very welcoming so. Alfredo is the president of the American Society of News Editors. He is also the editor of Al Dia, and has been a long-time advocate for diversity. In fact, set up programs that we've taught together in the Emerging Leaders program. But we got more work to do.
Yes. Of course, it's one of those moments where I think what's been happening or what's been reported in the last several months, it's underscoring the many needs that we have and systematic needs in our newsrooms, of all kinds of newsrooms. It could be, you know, the all newspaper model to only digital only or broadcast, any other form of newsroom. And the reason for that is, I think, for the last many years, we have devoted our energy and our emphasis and focus on finding a new business model. And that means audiences, that means technology, experimentation, and then innovation. So most of the training that we've done, it's been on the craft or coming up with those bridges to audiences and to success from the business model perspective. Probably, and for sure, we have not spent a lot of time on the core issue that we're talking about an inclusive, transparent culture. And I think that that's where, and listening to many of the comments this morning, obviously we have a lot of things that we need to work on, starting with those two things that have been alluded already in this conversation, diversity. I think it's inclusiveness. It's we need to recognize that different people coming from different segments will feel differently and there'll be a different impact when we have power dynamics, either being sexual harassment or misconduct or bulliness or many other things that are happening. And the other thing is also training. As you said, you and I, we've done many of those training sessions for a number of years. And it's just dawned on me in the last several months that we need to incorporate a lot of new things into the traditional training that we're doing. For example, we do training on how to manage conflict and conduct difficult conversations. And they're fun, and they're, well, not fun, but they're necessary, and the participants on the sessions, they're eager to go through that because we role play, and probably it's the first time ever that they're doing that. But we talk about issues, or we pick issues like how will you handle tardiness or missing deadline or issues with the craft. And those are important, and we need to have those. But probably systematically, and this is my point, we have not put a lot of attention on how you handle issues about harassment or not being an inclusive newsroom. What do you do when somebody who is as a junior member of your staff comes to you and says, in that corner, they're creepy eyes that they don't let me work? How do you handle that? And I think that we have not spent a lot of time nor energy on trying to help on that kind of training to the current leaders and, of course, to the rest of the staff.
And before we turn it over to, I think I saw 75 hands go up earlier when I said, who else has something to contribute? Before we go to that, this year, as president of the American Society of News Editors, you had to be on the phone with your board to remove one board member, who was Michael Oreskes, and you've also changed the conversation about what perhaps will be the agenda for your tenure as president. Can you let us in on some of that conversation?
Yes, of course, it's dealing with that situation. It was pretty difficult, stressful, and but I think in my role as president, I got the support from our executive director here, Terry Haight, and also other board members, Sam Vasquez, Manny Jenkins, others who are part of my board, and that they're advising me and helping me on that. So you need to go through that. I guess the decision, it was, there's no black and white here. I mean, there's no gray here. It's a black and white issue, and we need to go and do what we need to do. Now, because of that, I think we need to bring that situation into the forefront of the programs that we do, the training that we do, and for sure, we're going to have to be ready for when we do our convention, upcoming convention in September in Austin, Texas. A segment of this. I'm convinced, and I'm sure that we all are convinced, and again, I'm in preparation for this conversation, I talked to many of our ASNE members and solicited feedback on what are you doing in your newsroom and what kind of solutions do we need to bring to our industry. And I think the two elements that we're focusing on, and we're still developing that, and we need a lot of feedback and a lot of participation, and we need to partner with whomever we need to partner so that we can bring tangible outcomes and programming into the industry. But the two elements are retooling the training that we do, the leadership training, because again, that's the one that sets culture and makes newsrooms inclusive. And of course, the ever difficult issue about diversity in the newsroom. It's in our 2017 census released in October, only 33% of the managerial positions in America's newsrooms go to women. So that tells you there's an imbalance of power too and influence.
Okay, I am now going to go to the other expert voices in the room. Go ahead, Sarah Glover.
Hi, Jill. We have Sharon Masling, who's Chief of Staff for EEOC's. Hi, Feldblum.
Hi, everyone. I am just so excited to be here. Just hearing this conversation has validated a lot of the work that we at the EEOC have been doing for a number of years now. Perhaps not surprisingly, we get a ton of charges of harassment each year. In fact, close to 1/3 of all the charges of discrimination that we receive include a harassment claim. As a result, about 3 years ago, then Chair Jenny Yang convened a task force that was chaired by my boss, Commissioner Chai Feldblum, and then Commissioner, now Acting Chair, Vicki Lipnick, to look at the issue of harassment and what we can do to prevent it. A lot of the conversation today has been about what do we do after harassment has been discovered. A lot of the work that we've been doing at the EEOC has been on the enforcement side. What do we do when people come to us with charges of harassment? But we realize that to really make a difference, we really need to look at the prevention piece. So just having this systemic conversation is so, so important. We convened a task force of 15 members. We had representatives from business, employee representatives, labor, and we also had academics, because a lot of the issues we've talked about have been studied. Some of them have not been, which was also shocking. I could talk about the report forever, but that's not why I'm here. I did want to flag it for those who are not familiar with it, and I just wanted to kind of mention a few of the top highlights because they've been discussed already today. The first is that harassment happens across the board. It happens in all industries, at all socioeconomic classes, from the low-wage worker to very high up in the C-suite. And it's something that obviously media is struggling with right now, but so are many, many other industries. It's particularly prevalent in a lot of low-wage worker industries. And so please, I just ask you not to lose sight of that as well. It's also not just sexual harassment. There's still a lot of racial harassment going on, harassment on the basis of religion, on disability, a lot of intersectionality, as people had talked about. One of the things people had talked about was, what about our culture? And a lot of what we did was spending time looking at risk factors. And surprisingly, a bunch of the factors that were discussed today are risk factors for harassment. And what the report does is lay out those factors for leaders who want to be proactive and think about what are the factors in their workplace that might create predisposed workplace to harassment. So everything from power disparities to having superstars, to isolated workplaces, to homogenous workplaces, to young workers. Those are all big risk factors right now. There was a lot of conversation about what about the people before you get to the level of harassment. There are lots of assholes in the workforce. Bullying is not illegal, etc. And that was actually a big conclusion of the report, that if you really want to stop harassment, you have to start much lower down and look at what are the rude and uncivil behaviors that are happening in your workplace. As one researcher said to us, incivility is a gateway drug to harassment. And so
that will be tweeted.
Lilia Cortina. So that's something we've spent a lot of time looking at, that when you're talking about harassment training, yes, it's very important to tell people about their rights. And yes, it's very important to let people know that harassment is illegal and where to go if they have been harassed. But we also need to think about training in other contexts. So we at the EOC have launched what we call our Respectful Workplaces training, which is very much focused not on what you shouldn't do in the workplace, but what you should do in the workplace, and how people should behave and interact, and how to give feedback to someone if their behavior is bothering you, and how to receive that feedback if you've done something that you did not intend to be harassing or malicious in any way, but when someone says something to you, what do you do with that? And what do you as a supervisor do when someone comes to you with a complaint? And how can you coach an employee with problematic behavior? So all of that is, we think, part and parcel of what should be part of holistic harassment training. Two other things: bystander intervention training, which someone mentioned earlier, really important. How do we empower bystanders to step up? How do we make them feel comfortable? How do we make them feel safe that they won't be retaliated against if they harass? And last but not least, training alone will never work. It has to be part of a holistic harassment prevention program. You have to have organizational culture change. You have to have leaders who really want to make a change in the workplace.
Thank you. Thank you. That report is available at the EEOC website, and the nice part is it is scientifically sound. And interestingly, it also said that there's not a lot of evidence that training, anti-sexual harassment training, has been particularly effective. Either people tend to think it's protecting their bosses as opposed to making the workplace better, or sometimes there's a rebound effect, and sometimes there's just I'm going to just drop and, sure, that's somebody else's problem. And if you don't connect it with that constant conversation and modeling the kind of behavior that you think is acceptable, it's going to be a one and done.
You know, there was just to add on to that, there was a study done by a professor at Harvard who looked at 30 years of training and found that, and over 700 companies, and he found that for women, diversity training for the state of women made things worse. Because two things. One was the men who took it, it was primarily men who took it, and they felt that it was punishment, and they were being beaten over the head by a 2x4. And secondly, they felt like they'd taken the training and they were done. And so therefore, the professor concluded women would have made more progress if there had been no training whatsoever.
Karen, I'm sorry. I'm going to get to Karen from AP in a moment, but Ann Vasquez.
Hi, Ann Vasquez. I'm the Chief Digital Officer at the company that owns the LA Times and Chicago Tribune. You might know it by a name Tronc. I've been with the company since it was Tribune Publishing, and before that I was with Knight Ridder. And I look around the room, and this year makes it 22 years that I've been in this business, and it's still surprising to me that it takes a topic like this to get this many women in the room. Because when I'm in other conferences and other meetings, there's not usually this many women. And I think that's, to Joanne's point, I think we need to address this issue holistically in the same way that you cannot address an issue in a newsroom in one department. So you can't be all digital in one department and not across the whole newsroom. You can't solve harassment in our industry without looking at diversity and looking at inclusion holistically. And I think to do that, you need more women, you need more people of different viewpoints, you need more people of color, you know, just to give a little color to why it matters. You know, I was in a situation where I needed to hire someone who was a former employee at a company that I worked with, and because she was a former employee, I was asked by HR, please do your due diligence. I'm sorry to put my back to you. And please do your due diligence and check in with those who worked with her previously. Find out why she left, you know, just find out how she was perceived. And so I did that. And so I talked to two men who worked very closely with her, and they both independently had very similar descriptions. And their descriptions were, she was really talented, but I didn't love her. Or she was really good, had great ideas, was an innovator, but I wasn't a fan. And the words that they kept using just made it sound like it was a personal issue, like she just rubbed them the wrong way, or she maybe pushed too hard. And there were descriptions that have felt very true to me and at many points in my career. And so I heard these conversations. I had a conversation with her on the phone. It didn't jive with what I heard. So I went back to my HR partner and I said, I'd like to ignore these two men and still bring her in for an interview. Is that okay? And she absolutely said, yes, you can. And so I did. And she went through the interview process and everyone loved her. And I continued to love her. And she ended up being very successful at what she did. And that just told me that had I not been in the position that I was in and able to make that decision on my own, she very much could have been denied an opportunity that she very much was capable of doing. But I think, and it's not even outright discrimination, I wouldn't even call it that, because I think people have blind spots. I think Dorey Maynard always said it well, you have these blind spots. You don't even know what your blind spots are. And I think that these men just had very, you know, typical descriptions of something that is, you know, endemic in our industry, and I think in a lot of industries. And I think having more women and having more women in positions of decision making and people of color and people of different thought, I think that really is what's going to make all the difference.
Thank you. I'm going to have you hustle over there. The Associated Press has just launched recently, in the past few months, a separate reporting team on sexual misconduct. Karen Testa of AP is leading up that team, their East Regional editor. What are you finding?
Well, good afternoon. It's been really, really wonderful to share some time with you all, and I am daunted by the strength and the wisdom in this room. So thank you for being here and for sharing all this. I would share two things. One, when we talk about starting early and we talk about early training, I am a newsroom leader. I am also the mom of two boys, and I think the most important training that I am doing is with them. Because if we women don't share our stories about what we have endured and make it okay to share those in our families and with our boys, we are doomed to repeat this cycle for generations. Guys need to see the woman that they are about to touch inappropriately as their mom. And if they don't understand the impact of that, they may not.
Hashtag don't touch mom.
They may not ever change that. But in my role as a newsroom leader and as part of the sexual misconduct team, I was, something that Paul from the Post had said earlier struck me. He said, I asked my editor, should I do this story? I heard this awful story about this guy, but it's a guy that people wouldn't know, and so they kind of move on. And I think we have been trying, my directive sort of as this leader is to tell stories that connect the dots across industries, across diverse populations. We have written about harassment and misconduct and abuse of immigrant detainees. We've done the hospitality industry. We've looked at the reaction in the gay community to all of this. We have really been trying to make sure that as much as the media and Hollywood are under the spotlight right now, that people don't see this as being our problem uniquely. This is a fully cultural problem. It is a vexing problem. And I think as much as we want to look to strengthen our newsrooms and make sure that this is a protected space, we also need to really shine the powerful light that we have as news media all over the place where this is happening, so that people understand that this is something that needs to start from the time we are raising our children. If you're in a house where your dad is disrespecting your mom, you might grow to think that that's okay. And so we need to be telling the stories. We're doing a story now on, I'll die myself out, but we're doing a story now on boys and how you talk to boys and how you raise boys and things like that. So anyway, thank you for the few seconds and for the wisdom I've gained.
We have Sharif Durhams from NLGJA.
Hi, thanks. I'm the Vice President of Broadcast for the Association of LGBT Journalists, and I work for CNN. And just a few thoughts. First of all, thank you for having me participate in this as well, and I've spent a lot of time listening and hope that I can bring that back as value to my organization. But a few thoughts. One is that, as was said earlier, we don't measure what we don't count. In a lot of these surveys, we don't count LGBTQ people in newsrooms and keep ourselves accountable for whether we even have them in newsrooms. And that sends a signal to everyone that those issues aren't as prioritized as others, and so we need to do that. Related to that, particularly, we need to think about how we are talking about transgender coverage in our newsrooms, how we might be joking about transgender people in our newsrooms, how we might be not talking about transgender issues or bisexual people in our newsrooms. That sends a signal to people who might be employees in those newsrooms of whether there's going to be an extra layer that they have to deal with if they decide to come out about a harassment issue or come out about a coverage issue. So we need to check ourselves and see, are we telling those stories and are we telling them fairly? And the last thing is just co-signing what a lot of people have said, but it's just critically important. Hiring diverse teams, putting those diverse teams in leadership, and then letting them lead in the way they would lead, as opposed to the way that the culture of that organization has been before. I can tell you, being in the group that I'm in at CNN Digital, having meetings led by a white woman, a black woman, an Indian woman, and a black man of color, or a gay black man, those conversations are just completely different than newsroom leaderships. And they tell you what stories are important to them, obviously are going to be important to the people who are subordinate to them. And so having those different leadership teams leads to different culture in those newsrooms and different coverage.
And a lot of interesting stories that you otherwise wouldn't have. Right? So right over here next to you is Maya Ragu of the National Women's Law Center. And again, we're talking about systemic change. And you are, in fact, and this is not a new initiative, you have been working on this for some time. What do we need to know from the legal perspective?
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for inviting me to be part of this incredibly fascinating and really important conversation. Many of you in the room know who we are. For those of you who don't, we've been around for 45 years, and we are fighting for women and girls equality and opportunity in workplaces and education and reproductive rights and health. Some of you may have heard of us more recently because of our association with Time's Up, and I'm happy to talk more about what that is in particular in a minute. But I wanted to take a step back and sort of offer ourselves as a resource on some of these issues and add to what many of the wonderful speakers here have said today with regard to culture change, education of workers about their rights and empowering them to come forward, and then, because I am a lawyer, legal change and why that's important at this moment. So with regard to cultural change, right, we're talking not just about change within our workplaces, but change in our society as well around gender norms for men, for women, for people who are LGBTQ, and what that means. But I want to just emphasize that as you are looking at this as your own workplace issue and thinking about reporting it, that sexual harassment is a power issue, right? But thinking about it as a workplace equality issue and the way that it has really held women and people of color and many other vulnerable and marginalized groups back for so long. Sexual harassment is maybe the starkest expression of a power imbalance in a workplace, but it's certainly not the only one. And, you know, our work is focused on thinking about the ways in which sexual harassment is connected to, you know, unequal pay, to lack of accommodations for people who are pregnant or who are going to have children, and the lack of parental leave. So going back to Carrie's point about how do you create a culture in your workplace, and when you're thinking of that empowers people, and when you're thinking about that, what is the ideal worker in your workplace, and what kind of assumptions are built into that about who is always available, who gets to speak, who's in charge? All of those have worked for years systemically to undermine anyone who basically isn't a white man and a white straight man. So to be thinking about that as you go forward, and to emphasize again, the point Sharon made about prevention and that others have made about how it is not just about doing training, it is a whole host of other practices, including climate surveys, so that people have a chance to talk about things they are seeing in their workplace that they are afraid to talk about publicly, that you can try to catch ahead of time before it becomes a sexual harassment problem. So we are doing a lot, obviously, to help educate workers about their rights and empower them to come forward through our Legal Network for Gender Equity, and which is now going to be supported by the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund. But in terms of educating workers about their rights, someone made the point earlier that a lot of people don't even know what their rights are and don't necessarily understand when something is sexual harassment when it happens to them and don't know what to do. The flip side of that is I am seeing that a lot of people think they are protected under the law from sexual harassment when in fact they are not. And this is particularly relevant to this audience, I think, because independent contractors currently aren't protected under our federal laws, anti-discrimination laws. And so there's a lot of work that we at the Law Center are doing to change law and policy around the country and in states, and I'm happy to talk about that more with you offline, but just hope that we can partner with you on talking about the ways in which there are gaps in the law and the ways in which the law and our courts are failing people, vulnerable people like low-wage workers and people of color and immigrant workers right now. And there is a lot of work to be done to make sure that all of us can be safe in our workplaces.
So, because we'd all love free legal advice, does anyone, while we've got you up, does anyone have a specific question related to this kind of employment law that we perhaps can get a little quick answer? All right. Right behind you, there's a question. No, stay standing.
Quick question. Quick answer, I hope. And I pass this along from a male professional manager friend of mine. Is there a statute of limitations on harassment?
I should ask my friend from the EEOC to talk about this. Yeah.
Good.
Yes, there is the short answer. And it depends on whether you are going to the EEOC or you're going to a state or local civil rights agency, but I'll let Sharon talk about that.
Okay, so I'll just talk about the federal piece. If you believe you have an employment discrimination claim, you have to come to the EEOC first. You can consult with a lawyer, but before you're allowed to file a lawsuit, you first have to come to the EOC. You have to come within, in almost every state, 300 days of when the discrimination happened. Now, for sexual harassment, it could have started 5 years ago, but as long as there is one episode of harassment that happened within that 300-day period, you can still come. But if you have no, but that is basically your statute of limitations. If there is no harassing behavior that has occurred within the past 300 days, you've exhausted your claims under Title VII. But I'll let Maya talk about state laws.
So again, that same time frame exists for filing a claim with a state or local agency, and as Sharon said, that is a prerequisite before you can file a lawsuit. Now, the other kinds of claims you might have under state law, that varies from state to state. States sometimes provide more protection than federal law from harassment.
Any other questions for our legal experts? Thank you. Stick around, please. All right.
Jill, I have a question about how journalists can access those resources that you just mentioned under the Time's Up campaign that you're getting funding to provide.
So we are housing and administering the Time's Up Legal Defense Fund. So last year we launched our legal network to end gender equity, which is a network to connect people who have experienced sex discrimination, including sexual harassment in education, in the workplace, in healthcare, to a network of volunteer attorneys. So if people want to be a volunteer attorney, they sign up with us. If they are looking for legal advice, they sign up, and we help match people's. And then the attorneys commit to providing one free legal consultation. And in terms of how the funding will work for particular types of sexual harassment cases is something we're working on right now.
Great, thank you.
But I'm happy, if you want to ask me questions afterwards, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, definitely.
Sarah?
Yes, I was told by the powers that be that we have over 600 folks tuning into the live stream in addition to about 150 here. So, and we're still trending. So keep those tweets and posts coming at Power Shift Summit.
Good. And just for the help of our navigators here, could you raise your hands right now if you want to say something so they know who's on deck? Okay. Lisa, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Catherine Goldstein. I'm an independent journalist. And I've covered sexual harassment in news and mothers in journalism. And actually, those two topics and stories are related because I really believe that how we treat women, if they have a workplace issue or if they have a sexual harassment issue, also relates to how we treat women if they choose to become parents, if they go on maternity leave, how they're treated when they come back, if they're seen as having value, given promotions, given opportunities to continue to grow. So my question for the panelists is how do you all, you guys have, Lauren and Carrie have both talked about having children yourself and thinking about that for your workplace. How do you all think about not just supporting women if they are sexually harassed, but how you create a workplace that really fosters and nurtures them throughout their entire careers, as opposed to just at particular moments of vulnerability, and also to be sure that there are women like you all in these amazing leadership positions who are able to have families and able to hire and mentor more women.
So I have hired a woman who was 5 months pregnant. I promoted Eleanor Barkhorn, who's now a deputy managing editor, while she was on maternity leave. I think that this goes back to what I was saying before about modeling behavior. I think other women in the room might see that and see that having a baby is not a liability, in our newsroom at least. And I think that that's just a really important message to send out, not just me saying it or the company saying it, but actually showing it. And it's been proven with me too. I got promoted after I had a baby, and twice actually. And so it's putting your money where your mouth is. Like, this isn't just we're not just saying this is a friendly place for women. This is a friendly place for women. And we're not, and I think like connecting it to the sexual harassment, something that I think is really important. And I think that it's different than it has been in the past. I mean, in the past, when I've had training about sexual harassment, it's been about what's not allowed. Like, you're not supposed to do this. You're not allowed to do this. And when I talk to my staff about it, I talk about it in the sense of, like, here's the way that you can expect to be treated here. And I think that centers the conversation in a different place and hopefully makes people feel more comfortable coming forward or talking about their problems if you let them know that there is an expectation that they can expect for the way that they're treated as women, as people of color, as gay, lesbian, trans. And so that's sort of how I approach it.
And just to follow up quickly, one of the very sort of formative experiences for me too is not just having support to go out on maternity leave for as long as I wanted, but when I came back, there was an effort I was a White House reporter, there was an effort to make sure that my schedule was built so that I could be a mother who can get home at 6 o'clock at night and put my child to bed. And they allowed me to do that for almost a year and a half until I went to Brussels for a new job, so within Politico. And so for me, also one of my managing editors who runs the day from 7 in the morning until 6 at night, because that's who she is and wants to do that, she just went out on maternity leave. And like I told her before she left, when you get back, we're going to figure out what that schedule looks like so you have that re-entry that works for you and even moving forward. So it's not just focusing on making sure we support you when you have your child, but for the rest of it. And I think, Lauren, I do think the modeling is
and everybody's watching when that's happening.
Exactly.
Everybody is.
I'd like to make a quick point, though, about the helping women beyond the harassment piece of it. So first of all, having women in leadership is absolutely critically important. In the newsrooms that I've led have been at least 50% female in leadership. At USA Today, actually, 3 of our top 4 editors were female in my tenure, including Donna Limewand, who's sitting right here, managing editor. And that alone creates a community where people feel comfortable in raising their hand and in looking for growth opportunities. But the other thing is that women do not raise their hand for promotions as much as men do. That has been shown in a million different surveys. And so one of the things that I've always done as a newsroom leader is actually go to women. When there is an opening, you will see guys who are, have 1 out of 10 qualifications, like raising their hand saying, pick me, pick me. And women who are overqualified who are sitting on their hands. And I will proactively go and bring women in and say, you don't have to apply for this job, and I'm not saying you would get this job, but let's talk about what are you interested in. Let's talk about what are you interested in for your future, and what are the steps that you might want to take to grow and develop further.
And that means so much to employees to know that somebody is thinking about their next step. When you do surveys of employees, if they say, I don't know if there's any plan for me, I'm not getting any feedback, I don't know. Okay, we're going to go to Elisa. And by the way, one other thing you can do, I had a lending library of my maternity clothes. We had one. We celebrated how many babies one Wisconsin coat helped shelter in my newsroom. Yes.
Great. We'll start with Marie Nelson.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Marie Nelson. I'm the Vice President of News and Independent Film at PBS. And I wanted to quickly start off just by acknowledging Lynn Adrian in the room. Because when you talk about women who are not just mentors but allies, Lynn was instrumental to me transitioning from a long career in foreign policy into media when I went to ABC News. So I just want to acknowledge you for that. Thank you very much.
Just let the camera see you.
And I also want to echo the point that she was raising earlier in terms of us having a conversation, and an important one that has in some ways been focused a lot on individual organizations and really still wanting to blow that out a little bit and talk about what we do as an industry. Because I think for me, one of the things that I've struggled with, and I've worked in public media and private media, is this notion of accountability and how do we deal with all of the asymmetries across our organizations, and how do we create a little bit more of a level playing field. I mean, certainly there have been organizations like NPR and others where they've tried to, bring on board within their teams folks who are focused on issues of diversity and inclusion. How do you deal with a lot of these gender balance issues? And there have been organizations where, you know, they've outsourced those things to consultants. There's such a range, and I think that there's an important conversation to be had about the efficacy of some of those actions. I think we need to be having a conversation about the role of third-party accountability and how do we empower organizations that either already exist or perhaps need to come together in support of one another to figure out some of this stuff. Because at the end of the day, we all know that these decisions are made behind closed doors in organizations as well-meaning as they are, where there are people who are in leadership who, though they may want to be excellent in this regard, they aren't. And we're struggling in some ways needlessly. And so I think part of this has to be about how do we really be honest with ourselves about what's happening within our organizations, and how do we as an ecosystem stand up and support an organization that can help hold our feet to the fire, because quite honestly, we need that.
Thank you. Let's go over. Michelle?
Hi, my name is Michelle Ye-Healy. I'm a reporter at the Washington Post, and I'm the Senior Vice President of the Asian American Journalists Association. Thank you so much for doing this. I'm so glad that the conversation is broadening beyond just sexual harassment and sex discrimination and including all of the diversity, because we know that these issues go hand in hand and cannot be talked about separately. And I just wanted to talk about something that was just mentioned by the panel, which is that we don't get leaders like you overnight. And I wanted to talk about something we talk about a lot at AAJA, which is developing a pipeline for leadership, and being more deliberate about the people who are rising through the ranks and tapping them early and making sure that they have the resources and leadership ready to them throughout their career, not just when they're ready to become executive editor, or not just when they're ready to get a job or interviewing for a job with the HR executive, or at one of those pivotal moments, because we know that development, that crucial development happens throughout your career, and the earlier it can happen, the better. I wanted to mention this because we have a lot of powerful people here and powerful people watching, and it's something that every single one of us here can do, which is think about that one person that you know who's maybe younger than you, maybe older than you, who you know has potential, who you want to either replace you when you're ready to leave, or replace your boss who you may want replaced at some point. Maybe soon. Or maybe soon, maybe later. But, you know, being more deliberate about identifying talent, especially emerging minority talent, and ways to foster their growth. And I talk about this because there's a lot of cultural context that comes with experiences like mine, experiences like many of the people here who come from minority families, immigrant backgrounds. A lot of us are distrustful of systems. Having an open door and an HR policy is not good enough. A lot of us are not willing to speak up to say that I need help. A lot of us are not getting support from their families or friends or their communities, their hometowns. You just never know. There are a lot of sensitivities that come with minority, especially emerging minority leaders, because there are so many ways that they can be shut down without the help of one powerful person who's probably sitting in here or watching here, reaching out to them personally. And I just wanted to stress that because I get that all the time from people that I admire and respect and who I don't even know and who, you know, reach out to me, and that matters so much. And I just, you know, wanted to put a plug for organizations like us, AAJA, NLGJA, NABJ, NAHJ, even ONA, IRE. We are here as resources. We have leadership programs. We have mentorship programs. This is what we believe in. This is what we believe in, and what you're talking about today may be an hour-and-a-half session to some of you, but this is literally what we breathe and what we do every day, in addition to our normal jobs for some of us. So thank you so much for having this discussion, and please reach out to us and use us as a resource if you ever need, and even if you don't need, reach out to us.
Thank you, Michelle.
Can I say something? Michelle, I think you're right on the core issue of leadership development in our industry, in the news industry. There's no way that we're gonna be successful, even in the short term, if we don't incorporate that kind of thinking into how we create cultures, how do we recruit and retain and treat people, and how do we address journalism in general. I'm pretty hopeful that a lot of these organizations that you mentioned, that we're thinking and acting, hopefully, a lot more in terms of doing that kind of change. Whereas probably in previous generations, including mine, we were talking about diversity as the right thing to do. And there were so many books and articles and promises and conferences and initiatives and committees and all of those things. We have not really, raised the needle in significant numbers in terms of the numbers, just the numbers. But if we want to take it even further, it's not just the numbers, it's about the kind of culture, the kind of society that we have in our newsrooms. And I will say that because of what you just said, I'm hopeful that we're at the cusp of a new leadership bringing that kind of accountability to the core issues. Of course, we care about the craft. If we're going to be always thinking in terms of quality news and sources and all of those things that are basic. Nobody's saying that that's not the case, but also that we're incorporating the elements about fairness in the workplace and diversity in the workplace. I think Ann Vasquez had a very good point on the blind spots. It's time that we, I think the Maynard Institute developed that some 25 years ago, if not more. Somebody may correct me.
Fault lines, yep.
Yes. So some decades ago. It's time now for us to make sure that we get that thinking into the forefront of what we do.
Elisa?
Hi, I'm Shannon Van Sant with Press Forward, and my question really kind of builds on what you just said so eloquently. I was an assistant to Mark Halperin at ABC News for a period of time when I was about 18 years old. And fortunately, I escaped being assaulted by him. But I worked in an environment where I felt like I had to dance in between very powerful men and women, executives who enabled or were guilty themselves of assaults. And in Halperin's case, very, very violent assaults. So I guess my question for all of you, which is a follow-up question really, I believe, and I wrote about this in Politico actually, so thank you very much for giving me a voice, about the culture within television broadcast news, commercial news, which I think enabled and sometimes encouraged verbal degradation, abuse, and violence, which then would metastasize into, in some cases, rape or assault. And I was somebody, I dreamed of being a reporter from the age of 13, and I dreamed of working at ABC specifically. And it was a place of violence, like literally, as we've all learned. So I believe that if the interns, the youngest reporters, the young assistants had a voice in that system from way back when, we would have known so much sooner. If I had a voice at that time, if my colleagues who are here, former employees of ABC, had a voice then, these things would never have happened. And I almost feel like division by division, show by show, unit by unit, bureau by bureau, if the youngest production assistants, the youngest interns, the most vulnerable, however you define that term, it could be through being a minority, through being a woman, through being young, through being economically disempowered, if they are systematically and structurally given a voice in news meetings, as somebody suggested earlier, or somehow within the organization, these problems we wouldn't all be sitting here today. They would have been brought into the open and they would never have been allowed. But it's very easy to allow them when the only people who have a voice are the most powerful. So my question for you, and you've already spoken to this to some extent, is in addition to being a role model, in addition to instituting policies that are increasingly empowering, in addition to the legal aspect of this that we discussed earlier, do you have specific policies in place or structures in place that literally will go to the summer interns in your organization, to really the youngest, the least powerful people in your newsrooms, to hear what they have to say and hear about their experiences, what their interactions are like with your reporters and their story ideas, their editorial ideas?
Let's ask them. How do you onboard your interns? Go ahead, Politico. I know you got an answer. Whereas,
I would probably defer to Tracy, who could give a more detailed answer, but we have a far more structured process now than we ever have, in large part because we made the investment in a proper HR department. We always had people overseeing HR, but the importance of having a department that's concerned about the well-being and growth of everybody in the organization is not something we had until last year. And that's enormously important. Tracy, and in conjunction with the rest of us, is focused on the health and well-being of the people who work for us. And that includes interns, where we've introduced weekly sessions with, editors and reporters and people across the organization, where they're sitting in a room with me and with other people to hear experiences. In terms of what kind of feedback we're getting from them, there is a more formalized structure that Tracy could probably speak to. But I just would maybe add to your point, it's not only making sure that I'm a good role model, but I'm hiring people who are not assholes, who are good people, who treat people well. So it's not just me, but there is a multiplying effect that radiates, that I will not hire an asshole, and if you're a bully, I don't want you here, and you will never survive here. And so it's making sure that we are spreading that across the organization, across the newsroom, across the business side. No one wants to be around assholes, and assholes only allow bad things to happen. So I would say that's part of it, Tracy, if you want to, and then some others might want to speak to that.
Let's hand the mic just for a moment to Tracy to see if we've missed a thing about best practice for interns.
Yeah. So I think one of the things that we do is we treat our interns like we treat all of our employees. So we do an orientation when they come in, and we let them know who their resources are in the HR department, as well as within the newsroom or any other part of the organization that they work with. We have regular check-ins with them along the internship process with someone in HR that says, hey, how's it going? What are some things that you're struggling with? They have a buddy in the newsroom, somebody who's probably a little more their peer in terms of experience level that maybe they can talk to. And then we do exit interviews with all of them, and we ask them we do both a form where they can give us some more confidential information if that's easier for them, but we also do an exit conversation with them where we say, hey, how did it go? What can we do better? We're still learning as an organization. How were you received? What advice do you have for the people that are coming after you?
I would just really quickly say that Vox Media is an incredibly young company. I'm 36, and every day I feel very old. It's a really, 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 really young company, and I know people like to give millennials this bad rap. I've learned so much from the young people that work with us, because they are really, and I know that a lot has to do with the work culture, and the work culture at Vox Media has made that opening for them. But they speak up. There's a culture of junior employees speaking up very loudly at Vox Media, and it's made us a better company. And I'm not responsible for that culture. I didn't create it, so I can't sit up here and say how it happened. But it exists, and for young people entering this business who want to have a voice, I would say, research what kind of company you're joining.
But wouldn't you almost say, as someone who worked in broadcast news, I have very close friends who are all in broadcast news, and I do feel like there's a big difference between these types of work environments and broadcast TV news. There's a long way for them to go, right? To your point, there's a lot of work for them to do. Alfredo?
So one thing that I do is I don't call them interns. Of course, they're doing an internship. But, if we're in a public setting or I want to introduce that person to somebody else, I'll say, she or he is spending the summer with us. And the reason I chose to do that is because intern, it's a very loaded, word with status. It usually is the most burnable. It's like you're almost not here, or you're here for the coffee run, or all of those misconceptions. So I felt that, I don't know, a number of years ago, that if we just change a little bit the language, and we may actually help that person to feel a little bit more part of us. Everybody knows, and she knows, or he knows, they're there for 13 weeks, which is the case in Dallas. Fine, but that doesn't mean that it's like a second-class citizen.
And may I just speak on behalf of the broadcasters? And RTDNA is here And just to give you an example of the kinds of things that they are trying to do in terms of much of their own training in diversity, this summer, partnered with us at Loyola, we are going to do a 2-day anchored leadership program, not because we want them to be better readers, but we want them to be better leaders in terms of making good ethical decisions and being good role models in their own newsrooms and communities. And so this kind of training is absolutely critical in all organizations.
Hi, it's Kate McCarthy here from the Women's Media Centre. I wanted to mention 2 things very briefly that I think would be important to be part of the conversation. The first is online harassment, and something that I think is really important for newsrooms and media outlets to really recognise is that women and other vulnerable people, people of colour, LGBT people, are the people who are getting much more online harassment than anyone else, and they're getting a different sort of online harassment than anyone else. We recently did a training session with a big media outlet where we did a survey of all of their newsroom, and we followed that up with a workshop where we broke people into groups. And what we found is, first of all, many of the more senior people were white men, and many of the more junior people were women. And the experience of those 2 groups was, first of all, very different. And secondly, the leaders of the newsroom had no idea what was going on with their junior staff. The staff generally did not know. The organisation had a pretty good policy on online harassment, but no one knew about it. So there was a real issue of communication between what the policy was and what the employees in the situation knew. So I think that was something that was really important. It also turned out that some of the women who were getting bad online harassment had stopped doing things like responding to the comments or reading the comments that they were getting on their pieces, which the senior staff were horrified by, because that was part of their role and part of their responsibility. So this one session that we ran raised all sorts of issues that I think were really important when we're talking about this in the wider sense. The second thing, and this is a little bit of a plug, is back to what Alfredo said, sources are really important. And ensuring that you're asking your journalists that you're actually going out to try and get diverse sources in your stories, getting women, getting people of colour, getting people of different economic backgrounds into your stories is really important. Setting targets. We run something called She Source. We have over 1,300 women. Anything we put out is at least 40% women of colour. So setting targets, making it an important issue, showing that women at every level are important in the process, I think is crucially important. So
thank you. We have 9 minutes to go and so many good people, so self-edit, everybody.
I just thank you so much for those comments, because I think it was really important for people in this room to know that there are so many organizations that are committed to this issue and that are available as resources. The IWMF is currently about to launch a digital harassment national poll of newsrooms, and encourage all of your newsrooms to participate to try to gauge the scope and the impact, not only on the individual journalists, but also on the individual work's product. There's a lot of self-censorship going on, and certainly there are a lot of women leaving journalism because of digital harassment. So we'll reach out to you, and I hope that you'll participate in that survey. And please, Shirley.
Thank you. Shirley Carswell. I'm at Howard University now. I'm an instructor there, but for about 25 years I was with the Washington Post. And 2 points I wanted to make. One, I want to go back to what Lynn talked about with college students, because if you look at the makeup of college students in journalism, majority of them are women. And so as they move through the ranks, you know, we need to, I think, you know, this ties in with the interns as well. We need to figure out how to teach them, you know, what they need to know to survive in this business. A lot of the students at Howard have decided they don't want to go into this business, even though they're in journalism school. They want to do their own thing. They want to be entrepreneurs. And so I think we are losing people who would otherwise make excellent journalists. And, you know, some of them want to be journalists in entrepreneurial roles, but a lot of them just don't want a part of the sort of corporate media structure. And so I think that the other thing I would say about the business is that if you look at, you know, Raju made a statement about the number of people of color in that age range, I think 18 to 34, You know, soon will be the majority. If you look at all the women in journalism school, soon women and people of color will be in the majority, you know, if the trends continue. And I think that somebody else said it earlier, power concedes nothing, you know, without a struggle. And so I think white men are looking around and saying, hey, you know, women, people of color, you know, we're going to be the minority soon. And so I think that while we may all be well-intentioned, and, you know, I just think that there's a struggle ahead.
Thank you.
Just a few notes about trending topics. Emily Miller's comments earlier have received lots of engagement, and she's speaking to the same theme that we're hearing throughout the afternoon about resources and developing materials, and also the EEOC staffer Sharon Masling, her poignant comment about the 300 days. That's really sticking out to people that most people didn't know, as well as independent contractors not being covered under federal law. Wanted to pass the mic to you, and also just mention the Society of Professional Journalists has resources, newsroom resources for combating sexual harassment.
And before she speaks, just know that Lisa Shepard has been the driving force behind this program, recruited many of you, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. I did want to add as another resource, many of you know about JAWS, which is a terrible name, but a good organization for support for women. It's jaws.org. And I want to say that as we come to a close, let's all make a commitment to leave here and promise to mentor one person. Pick one person that you know, and I teach in a classroom, in a newsroom, or some young person who will benefit by your help.
Elisa?
Hi, Walia Lari. I'm the executive producer at WRL News in Raleigh. I want to preface by saying that I don't think the onus should be completely on women. That's been the discussion. I don't think that's how it should be, but that's the preface to my comments. I think I'm one of the only ones from a local TV newsroom here. And local TV newsrooms are full of young women, particularly producers. And one thing that I've realized, because I did it, was that we tend to defer to the older men and to men who are there. It took me a long time to realize that I was hired because my point of view matters, because my opinion matters. So now as a manager, what I like to do is echo and amplify the voices of those younger women in the newsroom. So whether it's in a meeting or in a side conversation, if they say something, I'll repeat it. Oh, Kim said this. Oh, Stephanie, you had this idea. And to give them credit, if they come to me and say, hey, why don't we do this? And I go to my boss, Rick, and I tell him, and I'll say, hey, you know, Stephanie had this idea. I think it's a good one. So encouraging their voices. And I think most importantly, letting them know that it's okay to disagree. I disagree a lot. And I think we've been taught, especially as women, that disagreeing is rude, that it's not nice, and that no one's going to like us if we do it. But in a newsroom, when everything's subjective, it is so important to disagree. So I think once we do those things and build confidence on the editorial side for young women, they'll have the confidence in other aspects of the newsroom. When they see something wrong or right, or when they're being infringed upon, they'll know that I have the confidence to speak up and say something because I know someone will have my back and someone's taught me and given me the confidence to be who I am supposed to be in this newsroom and why I was hired to be there. So that's kind of thing that's worked for me that I just wanted to share with others.
Good point. And knowing that we have 3 minutes left before Kathy and I wrap up, I want to tell everybody in the room that you have a sheet at your table that says, but wait, there's more. And on it, if you have a comment, a thought, an idea, a suggestion that you want to make sure we get out, do it today. Leave it here. It's going to be it could be included in the report that's going to be prepared. And those of you who are watching now and want to say something too, the museum just created Power Shift More at museum.org. I'm going to say that again. Power Shift More at museum.org if you'd like to send comments. And in our last 3 minutes,
Hi, I'm Sherry Williams. I'm the assistant professor in race, media, and communications at American University, and I'm trying to talk really fast. But what I wanted to say is, just to everyone here, that we've talked a lot about professionals, and I want to agree with the professor from Howard University who said that we really need to be doing more with students. Because I was a newspaper reporter for 10 years, and I started my career in 1999, my first full-time job. And from that time up until now as a professor, I have always mentored young women and talked about how to avoid the professor who everyone knew who was a little bit too comfortable and too handsy. And when you go to job fairs and when you go to conventions, you should probably not travel alone at a certain at a certain time of night, and you're not responsible for having dinner or drinks with a recruiter at times and at different situations where you felt uncomfortable. So what I'm really trying to say is, while we're talking about making these shifts within newsrooms, we really need to make them in journalism across the board, because there is sometimes a predatory nature, this kind of predatory culture in which young women feel like they have to acquiesce to do certain things just even while they're still students, to get an interview, to get an internship, and even to get a conversation with someone, to get freelance opportunities. So it's not just only in the newsrooms, it's in these journalism, professional journalism organizations that we need to make some shifts, and we need to keep our colleagues responsible for how they're acting when they're at these recruitment fairs and when they're going and interacting with students. And it's even the educational journalism organizations and associations where students are feeling uncomfortable and feeling pressed to do things that they are not comfortable with. So some students are really having some dilemmas and interactions with this kind of behavior before they even get to work.
You hit it on the money. That was so good. Okay, they told me we have, for this segment, and Kathy and I are going to wrap up, just 30 seconds. So each of you has just one word that you are going to leave us with. One word. What will it be?
Oh, come to me last.
Come to you last. Or it can be the title of a book. It's okay.
Okay. Bring men into the conversation.
Okay.
Listen.
Be good to one another.
Yeah.
Listen to the most vulnerable person in your newsroom.
Love it. Let's thank our conversation leaders. I'm going to ask you your place. Thank you. We're going to bring Kathy Trost back up for a few final wrap-ups. Kathy, will you join me?
Hi. We're just going to wrap it up in less than 15 minutes. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we heard in the room today, just the highlights, and also what's next, what we hope to do through this institution next. But I'd like to tell you, first of all, that we've established an email address for anyone to follow up with any ideas. It's called powershiftmore@newseum.org. So just if you don't write at your table or you haven't spoken today, please email us and keep ideas and thoughts coming. I'm so awed by this room. I think other people have said it a million times. Daunted, awed, so honest. I've never seen a more engaged meeting. I've never been in a meeting where more people engaged, honestly. So I know it's hard. I know we're talking about tough things. Thank you very much. Most importantly, we heard some great advice for how to move forward, and I'm going to try to just sum up some things that we need more of. There was a lot of what do we need more of. It includes intergenerational conversations more. We need more men being part of the conversation. We need more training, particularly around how do we train young journalists coming up to deal with not only intolerable behavior, sexism, and discrimination in their own cultures, but how to succeed in the workplace, how to be powerful, and how to retain them. Management needs to be more transparent about how to handle harassment issues. Newsroom cultures need to change. As many people mentioned, we need to measure and count. We need to hire diverse teams, and we need to hire diverse leadership. We need to make HR part of the conversation and have trusted listening groups, much like we heard from NPR. We need to educate and remind that sexual harassment is against the law. Unbelievable that people don't know that. Women need to tell their stories, not only to their own institutions, but to reporters, to friends, to managers. They should tell more to each other so that reporters can then use that system, that line to help verify these stories. Interns and freelancers need special protection. We heard that over and over again. These are just top lines. We need more people of color in management and decision making. The news industry is losing incredible talent as women and people of color leave. Bullying must be addressed. It keeps people quiet. It can help lead to sexual misconduct. And someone wrote, and I'll just say it again, don't hire assholes. I think that was one of the great themes from the conversation today. So those are some of the top notes, and I'm going to turn it over to Jill for her thoughts and then come back to you with a final thought.
For those of you who like to read more, Christine Porath of Harvard has a book on workplace civility. I commend it to you. It has some self-diagnostics in it that can help you analyze your team. Bob Sutton of Stanford wrote the No Asshole Rule book and his newest one, which is the Asshole Survival Guide. We've said asshole more times than ever in this room. I think we have to think about the language that we use as leaders. You know, somebody invented the word handsy. Think about how we minimized what that means. If every time you were tempted to say handsy, you said molesty, what would happen? I think that what's really important is to think about not caring about this in crisis. That's what too often happens. People will call somebody in to train on ethics after plagiarism. People will think about harassment training after this earthquake. We have to do preventive medicine, and that isn't as kind of high profile, and it's easy in a tough budget to cut. A friend of mine recently was talking to me. She's an attorney. And I was telling her that I was getting ready to judge a journalism contest. And she said, boy, you journalists give each other a lot of awards. And we do. And I think it's what sustains us, right? Because it's the validation of our peers. But today you had the opposite of it. You had people who weren't giving each other awards. They were sharing best practices, but they were also confessing worst sins. And it's that humility, that award-winning humility that came into this room today. I will also tell you that if you look around the room, and I warned the director that we might want to just do this, take a look at this room. We came together not by accident. There is a ratio of almost 10 to 1 women to men in here, not because we don't like men. In fact, some of our careers have been advanced by brilliant men who cared a lot. But we knew that by not all that much work, we could get some terrific voices, any one of which could have been a keynote speaker about this topic in an organization. So realize that this kind of diversity of thought and participation comes because you care and you make the effort to do it. When I teach leadership, I teach two things. One, the most important thing leaders do is help others succeed. And the second is my management mantra, life's too short to work with jerks. My friend?
Say your final words? Okay. All of us at the Newseum and the Newseum Institute and the Freedom Forum are deeply committed to continuing this conversation, and we want to talk about ways to do that. We'll get back too, but this was a start. I just want to first of all thank Jan Newhart for her lifelong commitment to these issues, and also for pushing us all to do this. This was Jan's idea. She said a month or so ago, can it only have been a month? You know, we have got to be part of this conversation. Moving forward, there's a couple of tactical things that we're going to do. All of you will get in your inboxes tomorrow a summary of the highlights of the conversation, some video clips, and some other key elements of today's conversation. We are working on a follow-up report with a call to action and recommendations that will come to you, we hope, this month. But mostly we look to you for ideas. So we want to know what you think are this is a lot of information to process from today, and we need your help in thinking about what are the key things to do next. And we will work with you and convene again. That's our promise, to work with you and convene again on these issues in whatever direction they go. In particular, I want to thank Jill Geisler. Come on, give it up. Many of you, I don't think, would be here without Jill. You've trusted her over the years with conversations in your own newsrooms, and she has been such a tireless person putting this together, and we couldn't have done it without you, Jill. And also the same to Alyssa and Sarah. Where are you? Our incredible co-navigators. Yeah. Thank you so much. And to everybody in the room, because you talked, and that was the most important thing. And we let's not let this be a one-off. Let's make this conversation continue, and let's work together to make it better. Thank you. Oh, and I'm sorry, Jan Newhart. Okay.
I'm just going to say what Kathy didn't tell you is I may have come up with this idea a month ago, but Kathy has had very little sleep in the last month. And Lisa's been a big help to her. And really, we had very high expectations for this summit, and I think it's fair to say we've exceeded them. And that's due to our navigator-in-chief, and it's due to the co-navigators who have literally been on their feet all day, and the panelists, and to everybody in this room for sharing your stories and giving voice to this issue and your advice and looking forward with us. And as Kathy said, this is just the beginning, and we hope to do many more things here at the museum and with all of you as we press forward together. And so I thank you all so much. And again, those of you online who have been watching and sitting here with us all day, thank you for staying tuned. And that email address, powershiftmore@newseum.org, please all of you share your thoughts, and to be continued with our report and many other things. But thank you all so much for being here.
And the coffee bar is still open
yes.
if you would like to talk. Thank you.